I'm not sure if it's working. Yeah, looks like recording should be working, so go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me and for that nice introduction, Joni. I really appreciate it. As you all know, we will be discussing my book, North America's Galapagos, the Historic Channel Islands Biological Survey. And oops, let's see how this is not working quite right. I guess I'm going to have to advance this way. Here we go. And the first inhabitants of these islands were the island Chumash and the island Tongva people. So I invite you to join me in extending our respect and gratitude to these original caretakers of these, both from a conservation and stewardship point of view. And we can thank them for safeguarding these magnificent landscapes. Okay. So my book recounts the never before told adventures and ambitions of a group of scientists, naturalists, and explorers who came together in the late 1930s to embark upon a series of unprecedented expeditions that have never been replicated or had never been done before. Their mission: to piece together the human history and biological evolution of California's 8 Channel Islands. And they did this survey under the aegis of the Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History. All right, okay. So I'm going to bore you just for a moment, and then we'll go see some pretty pictures. But I want to give you sort of a bit of an idea of how these islands came to be. These are California's 8 Channel Islands. They lie in the ocean like giant paint splatters on a Google Earth-sized Jackson Pollock canvas, stretching from from Point Conception all the way down to almost San Diego. Now, the rocks that would become the Channel Islands didn't always were originally submerged on the seafloor here near present-day San Diego as part of the continental margin of the North American plate. And then through very complicated plate tectonics and geological activities, some of these rocks were dragged as much as 150 miles northward and rotated as much as 180 degrees clockwise. And then about 2 million years ago, they began rising up out of the ocean in roughly the current configuration that they are in today. What I want you to take from this little discussion about their geology is just to remember that these islands were never attached to any terra firma that could have been responsible for pollinating them with plants or animals. That means that everything living on these islands had to get out there somehow and then adapt and evolve. Now, I mentioned that these islands roughly came up out of the ocean in their current configuration, but there were some differences 2 million years ago and longer. One of them was before sea level rise, the islands were all much larger. Now here we have the 4 northern islands, Anacapa, Santa Cruz, Santa Rosa, and San Miguel. And they were once part, and this is their current landmass, these brown blotches. But they were once one island, which was this island here, which is the blue line, and it was called Santa Rosa. Likewise, the mainland coastline, which is the brown line here, was also much bigger before sea level rise, and its former coastline was here by this blue line. So you can see that these islands were much closer to the mainland than they are today, just about 5 miles. And what that means is that animals and plants had a little bit easier time getting out to these islands, this landmass, and then could walk or hitch a ride on some fur and find its way to the 4 northern Channel Islands, these 4. So we see these islands here have more species diversity on them because things had an easier time of getting out there. And also they have more species in common between each other than do the southern islands, which are these 4, which were never attached to any terra firma. And we're also always farther out to sea and farther away from one another. Now, one sort of really important distinguishing difference between all these islands is the amount of fresh water that they have on them. Two of the islands, Anacapa and Santa Barbara, have absolutely no fresh water on them whatsoever. And that means that everything living on those islands must survive for its freshwater sustenance by rainfall, or fog. Other islands like Santa Cruz and Santa Rosa are very, very well watered. So I told you I wouldn't bore you for too long with these maps, but what I want to do now is take you out to the islands, get to know them a little bit, find out why they're so special and unique, and then we'll dive into the story that my book recounts. So these islands, let me share with you that they are wild. Oops, sorry. Oh no. Good thing we weren't too far. Wild, harsh, thrilling, and spoiled. Spoiled in terms of humankind's careless use of them through the introduction of exotic species such as horses, cattle, sheep, pigs, rats, rabbits, goats, bison, pigs, agricultural crops. This photo I took, it's in the main ranch, the main valley in Santa Cruz Island. It's sort of in the middle of the island. And all of this land that you see here that's green, and even extending further down this beautiful valley here, and all of this land in the 1800s was planted with wine grapes. And this here is the remnant of the former winery that was on Santa Cruz Island. Now, while I might be the first person to say that every island deserves a little wine, perhaps we shouldn't be growing the grapes on them unless they occurred there naturally. And then we have the issue of non-native plants that were accidentally brought onto the island, such as the fennel, that has really wreaked havoc on Santa Cruz Island because it's very much taking over. Even so, these islands remain resilient in their unruly ability to resist domestication, no matter how forcefully we've attempted to use them and harness them as ranch lands, big game hunting parks, recreational venues, movie sets. These two bison are two of a legacy herd of 15 animals that were brought over in the 19 teens to film a Zane Grey cowboy movie. And when the shooting stopped, the Hollywood execs thought it would be too expensive to bring the 15 bison back to the mainland, so they just left those 15 bison there. And they did very, very well on Catalina Island, growing to about a herd of 500. And today they are managed to a more reasonable size. And these islands have also been used as bombing ranges. In fact, two of the islands are very secretive military bases. Even so, approximately 150 plants and animals make their home today or in the past, some of are extinct, on the Channel Islands and nowhere else on the planet. Here we have a number of animals that are subspecies or species on the Channel Islands, and we're not going to talk about all of them, but we've got a couple species of deer mice and harvest mice that live on some of the islands. We are going to talk about the island jay because that is the only endemic bird on the Channel Islands. We have this beautiful little western spotted skunk that's a subspecies of the mainland skunk, the beachy ground squirrel, an island fence lizard, also distinct subspecies, the fox, which is just too darn cute not to talk a lot about. And then I just want to draw your attention to this, and these are only some of the animals, of course, but I want to draw your attention to this shrew. This is a Catalina Island ornate shrew. It is a subspecies of the mainland shrew, and until 1940, no shrews had ever been found on any of the Channel Islands. And the person who figured out what this animal was, and that ultimately figured out that it's a subspecies of the mainland shrew. His name is Jack von Blocher Jr. And Jack was the survey's mammologist from the Los Angeles County Museum and bat expert. And this is a little story that's in my book, but that I won't spoil it in case you're going to read the book. But the manner in which and the timing of how Jack Kofer got his hands on this very first shrew ever found tells you as much about the serendipitous nature of science as it does about the U.S. Postal Service in the 1930s. We also have the pygmy mammoth, this little guy right here. He was about 5'7", and he evolved from the Columbian mammoths that swam across the channel to inhabit Santa Rosa. And then over time, some of them evolved into this smaller mammoth. This mammoth only lived on the Channel Islands, the three of the larger islands of the northern chain. And it evolved to occupy a different ecological niche than the Columbian mammoth. It ate different foods, and its muscles and bone structure also changed so that it could walk up and down very steep island slopes and mountaintops and feed in areas that the Columbian mammoth was not capable of accessing. And then it had sort of a braking function, like four-wheel drive, that allowed it to also get down those same slopes. All right, so let's talk about the fox. My book goes into much more depth than I have time to do today, but this fox exists as 6 distinct subspecies on 6 of the Channel Islands. No surprise that only the 2 smallest items that have no islands that have no water on them whatsoever do not have their own subspecies of fox. They evolved from the mainland gray fox into one of the smallest canids in the world and the smallest canid in North America. But what I love about this fox is its fearless heart. It is the top terrestrial predator at 10 pounds or less. It's the top terrestrial predator on the Channel Islands. And it has no fear. They come out in daytime. They'll come visit your picnic table. They'll walk around the beach. And, you know, if you're sunbathing, they may walk around you looking for mussels or something to eat. But they are really a really cute animal to see out there. However, its place as the top terrestrial predator on the Channel Islands did nothing to keep it from going nearly extinct on all 6 islands that it occupies as recently as the late 1990s. Now, the causes of this near extinction event were very difficult to figure out because on each island that the fox inhabits, the causes was slightly different, but they were all human-related causes. And to give you an idea of the magnitude of the decline in these fox numbers, in 1992, it was estimated that on Santa Rosa Island alone, there were about 1,800 or 1,900 foxes living. Santa Rosa Island, you know, the subspecies fox. By the end of that decade, 1999, only 15 foxes were left on that island. So we really almost lost these guys. Luckily, through a concerted effort of the U.S. Park Service, the U.S. Navy, NGOs, private citizens, etc., the foxes have been reestablished on all the islands that they originally inhabited, and they've remained as distinct subspecies. So the captive breeding programs were going on each of the islands. And today the foxes are being monitored to make sure that this never happens again. Now, besides being one of the most gratifying conservation stories and really a heartwarming story that tells us sometimes we can undo the damage that we do, it's also a reminder to us that islands evolved in isolation, and they do better when we don't bring foreign and exotic species to those islands, which is what happened to the foxes here. And again, my book goes into much more detail. It's a fascinating story. Now, these next 2 slides I don't usually include in my talks, but because you're the Audubon Society, I thought you might be interested in seeing a little bit more about the birds on the islands. These slides were given to me by Paul Collins, who is the who is the emeritus curator of zoology at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History and an expert on the Channel Islands birds. He collaborated with a gentleman by the name of Justin Stable and has written a book that's coming out in the late spring of 2025 entitled Birds of California's Channel Islands. So here you can see we have one endemic species, some near endemics, which means that the birds live, most of the population of the bird lives only in one area. We have some single island endemics like the Santa Rosa Island spotted towhee or the Santa Cruz Island spotted towhee. We also have multiple island endemics as well. Okay, now one of the most famous birds, I'd love to know how many of you have seen this bird, but this is the island scrub jay. He is descended from the mainland scrub jay, and today lives only on Santa Cruz Island. In the past, this bird, we have fossil evidence that it also lived on Santa Rosa and San Miguel and possibly Anacapa. It's a really interesting thing to study and look at because the island scrub jay is about 25% larger than the mainland jay and much more brightly hued. And it's a great example of a scientific theory that I and many scientists colloquially refer to as the breadbox theory of evolution. The breadbox theory of evolution holds that when animals are introduced into an isolated environment like a mountaintop that you can't reach very easily, or an island, if they arrive to that place and they are bigger than a bread box, like the Columbian mammoth, when they evolve, or if they evolve into something new, they evolve into something smaller, like the pygmy mammoth. And the jay, the mainland jay came to the islands and it was smaller than a bread box. So it evolved into this much larger bird. And if you all want to add this to your life list, I highly recommend you visit Santa Cruz Island, try to get to Prisoners Harbor because they're more abundant there. It's sort of an Oakland habitat there. And they're very raucous and friendly. So you would probably get to see them. So here's a couple of the island endemics or multiple island endemics. We have the Santa Cruz Island spotted towhee, this lovely Channel Island song sparrow. I don't know if you can even see the lark here. It's a nestling. This photo was taken on Santa Barbara Island, and you can see it just sitting on the ground there. And we have the San Clemente Island loggerhead shrike. Now, this bird also was close to extinction. It is a subspecies of the mainland loggerhead shrike. And the cause of that was bombing and the fires in its primary habitat. But the US Navy did step up. They initiated a captive breeding program. I think there was down to like 14 or 15 birds. Not a lot of this bird was left on that island, but today the population is definitely rebounding. Okay, let's see, sorry. All right, so in addition to animals, there are certain plants that are found only on the Channel Islands, and this is a Dudleya that can only be found on 1 square mile of land in this entire planet, and that's on an island, Santa Barbara Island. It's the Santa Barbara Island live forever. And remember that Santa Barbara has no fresh water, so it has to get all of its fresh water from fog and rain. And on the other side of the size spectrum with respect to plants, we have the endemic Santa Rosa Island Torrey pine, which is probably the rarest pine tree in the world. It is related to the San Diego Torrey pine, but it only grows in 2 groves on Santa Rosa Island. And if you're so inclined, you can easily come to this island. It has a beautiful pier and take a nice walk from about here all the way up this gentle incline to take a look at these beautiful trees. Now, in addition to the endemic species that live only on the Channel Islands, other species also rely on the islands for their survival. Seabirds are a primary example of this, and the reason for that is because seabirds are primarily ground nesting birds. And so they just hollow out a space on the ground, they lay their eggs, they incubate them, they hatch them and fledge them all on the ground. So if there are predators, you can imagine that makes a big problem for these animals. And indeed, we had seen that in the past, and I'll get into that a bit more. The Channel Islands, Santa Barbara and Anacapa are the only breeding colonies of the brown pelican in the Western United States. About and part of Anacapa is actually closed off for 10 months of every year to visitors, land visitors, and even boaters have to stay very far away from shore. You probably know that the brown pelican was listed on the endangered species list due to DDT poisoning, but has since been delisted, and I think is doing pretty well. Another bird that's very dependent on the islands is the Scripps murrelet. This is among the rarest seabirds in the world, and about 1/3 of the world's breeding population nests on Santa Barbara Island. When these chicks hatch, they only spend 48 hours on the islands before their parents are down in the water calling to them, and they simply tumble off out of their nests and roll out down the cliffs and into the water to join their parents. I was lucky enough to see some of these Scripps murrelets on Santa Barbara Island when I visited there. All right, now you might not really care that much about Western gulls, but I will say that I went to Anacapa Island when they were nesting, and I look at them very differently now. They are beautiful birds. They're very large. On Anacapa, about 10,000 of them gather, and they're all sitting on the ground, and you can just walk right through them. And it was really interesting to me because when I saw them, all the birds were facing one direction, and then you would walk away a little bit and turn around, and then now all of a sudden they were all facing a different direction, and I didn't understand why this was happening. So I asked an ornithologist, and they explained to me that the birds are facing into the wind, so the wind is blowing their feathers back, and they don't risk having them be bent. When the chicks hatch in May and June, they don't stay around too long because they're gone by July. But anyway, if you can get out to see the birds on Anacapa Island, it's a very short boat ride, and I think you would probably enjoy it. So switching gears, let's talk about island archaeology. The National Park Service deems the archaeological sites on the Northern Channel Islands to be among the most valuable in North America, if not the world. This sentiment is echoed by a very well-known Channel Islands scholar, Tori Rick from the Smithsonian, who states that the island's archaeological record plays a role in research issues and questions of global significance. So what are these questions of global significance? Well, one of them is the manner in which and the timing of when people first arrived to North America. When most of us were young, we were taught that people walked from Siberia across the frozen Bering Land Bridge into the ice-free corridor of Canada, and then down into the central part of the United States to Clovis, New Mexico, and then eventually walked all the way to South America. Today, largely because of finds made on the Channel Islands, we now know that people who had a maritime culture and maritime capabilities paddled up the Siberian coastline, crossed over or through the Bering Land Sea by boat, and then followed the coastline down North America, Central America, and then into South America, making populations and staying in one place at times. Now, they, as I mentioned, the Channel Islands have been very important to the development of this theory for a couple of primary reasons. First of all, there is very little development on the Channel Islands, so the archaeological record remains intact, and the stratigraphy of Native American sites can be very well examined. Secondly, we have no burrowing animals who are going to upset that stratigraphy. And lastly, because it's by the ocean, sometimes the salt spray impregnates sites and preserves items that can be radiocarbon dated. So the Channel Islands have a preponderance of sites on them that date to 9,000 years of age or older. And this is more than we would normally find in the mainland. And you have to remember that these sites, such as this midden site that's pictured here, were once inland sites. So the oldest sites today are underwater because of sea level rise. So this is really important. Secondly, the oldest shell midden ever found in North America is on San Miguel Island. Now, this photo here on the lower right is San Miguel Island. This is a shell midden. A shell midden, if you aren't familiar with that term, is a place where people once through the cast-off items of everyday life, maybe a knife blade, or if they ate an abalone or a mussel, they would throw the shell in a pile, and over time, these basically trash heaps accumulate, and scientists can mine them for maybe organic materials that they can carbon date. And that is exactly what happened at Daisy Cave on San Miguel Island. This is not Daisy Cave, but it's just a midden. But Daisy Cave offered evidence that people were on San Miguel Island as long over 12,000 years ago, because what they dated was 12,000 years of age, or from that midden. Additionally, I'll just point you to now this black and white photograph that was taken in November or December of 1941 by a young man named Jack Kofer. He was 16 years old when he stepped foot on Santa Rosa Island. He was the youngest member of the Channel Islands Biological Survey. His mother had to write him a permission slip letting him go. And he was here on looking for mammoth bones, but took this photograph of Arlington Canyon, which in the 50s were found human remains that were very old, known to be old at the time, but have been recently, or not so recently anymore, but maybe in the last 15 or 20 years, recarbon dated with modern techniques. And it proves that people were on these islands over 13,000 years ago. So originally we thought Clovis, New Mexico was about 13,000 years of age, but it wouldn't make sense for people to get to Clovis, Mexico in 13,000 years, and then 200 years later make their way all the way to the West Coast, develop maritime capabilities, and then get to the Channel Islands. So all put together, we now believe that people first came to North America between 14 and 20,000 years ago, and possibly much longer than that. So I hope from this discussion, you can see that there are a lot of interesting things out on these islands, but an expedition such as that launched by the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County had never before been attempted, and it's never been replicated. So whose idea was it to do this very unprecedented survey? Credit for that goes to this man, Donald C. Meadows, who in 1938, when he proposed the survey to the museum, he was a 41-year-old Long Beach, California high school biology teacher, a lepidopterist, which is a butterfly and moth guy, with a personal collection of 20,000 butterfly, a father and husband. And he was very ambitious. At the height of the Great Depression, he left his very comfortable teaching job in Long Beach to go back to Berkeley to get his master's degree in entomology, and he studied under Joseph Grinnell. And the reason he did this is because he wanted to attain a teaching position in higher education at the college or university level. And so he thought he would do this with master's, but as it turned out, he went back to high school. Nothing wrong with high school teachers, but that's not what he wanted to do. So he decided he would get his PhD, and he would do something that no one had ever done, which is to survey all the butterflies and moths on all 8 of California's Channel Islands. Now, he realized that this was a big task, so he needed some help. And for help, he went to this man, John Adams Comstock, who was the director of science at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County at the time. He was also a lepidopterist, and he was a very wise man and very beloved as well. And he saw merit in Meadows' plan. He thought that, but he saw it as something much bigger than just a survey of the butterflies and moths. He believed that it should not only be all 8 islands, but it should include all of the sciences. So the botanists, the zoologists, the mammalogists, the ornithologists, the archaeologists. He wanted all his staff to get out there, make collections in every season of the year, and he thought that this would take 5 years. So he wanted his scientists to go out to the islands, make collections, then bring them back to the laboratory for scientific analysis, then write peer-reviewed scholarly articles followed by articles for the general audience, and then to develop museum displays. So he and Meadows on Christmas Eve, 1938, presented a proposal to the Honorable Board of Governors of the Natural History Museum of LA County, asking them to approve this unprecedented survey, which again has never been replicated. And the reason what set it apart from anything that had come before is not only its 8-island scope, which had never been attempted, but the multidisciplinary approach. So they presented it, and lo and behold, the Board of Governors approved it, which is pretty remarkable considering that in 1938, the country was still suffering from the Depression, and LA itself was besieged by police racketeering and political corruption. Now, I believe that the reason that this survey was approved was because John Adams Comstock included one very shrewd provision. He promised the Board of Governors that this ambitious survey would cost the county, the museum, absolutely nothing more than the regular staff salaries of the scientists who were going to participate and work for the museum. That meant that citizen scientists like Don Meadows, who was the guy with the idea, and some of his other Long Beach friends, like this fellow and this fellow, could participate, but they would not get paid. It also meant that the scientists themselves had to bring all of their own personal camping gear, pay for their own food, hire a camp cook in order to go out there. And perhaps most vexing of all was the issue of transportation for themselves and their considerable gear, because they were either going to have to pay for it themselves or find somebody who was willing to transport them. Well, John Adams Comstock developed a couple of relationships that served the survey well over the next several years. One was with the California Fish and Game, which is now Fish and Wildlife, of course, but this is the bluefin and the yellowtail. They were the cruisers that were used by California Fish and Game, and they provided transportation to and from the mainland and between the islands for the survey. And the second one was with this gentleman. This is Alan Hancock, who was a billionaire oil magnate and also a gentleman scientist. And he commissioned the building of this beautiful boat. It was very modern. It was up to Coast Guard standards. It was called the Valero 3. And he would go to the South Pacific and make collecting expeditions. He actually had a surgery room in there and places he could store animals and things like that. But Alan Hancock said, sure, if I'm in town and my schedule permits, I'll take you guys back and forth between the islands. So in February 1938, off they went. That was the, 39, excuse me, February 1939 was the first expedition. Now, I just want to introduce you to a couple more of the scientists, and then we'll move along. First of all, this is Jack von Blocher Jr. I mentioned that he was the bat expert and the mammologist. He was my favorite character because he was driven, he was, he was ambitious, and he was flawed. He had some really dark things in his past. I was lucky enough to meet his son, who told me a little bit more about his father, but I really like Jack von Blocher. Jack was a very good field man. You can see here he's with his collection, but he was also good at taking the things that he found in the field back to the laboratory, examining them, and then writing up scientific publications. He was also very ambitious, and he went to Berkeley as well as Meadows and studied also under Joseph Grinnell. And at that time, when he was getting his master's, he started a paper about the land mammals of the Southern California islands that had never before been written. And Grinnell actually encouraged him to continue working on that project as he pursued a PhD, which he attempted to do for the next 25 years. Both of these projects, he wanted to finish that paper and get his PhD. I won't tell you what happened. You have to read the book. Now, I do want to show, have you take a look at this picture here on the right. This is Jack von Blocher, and he's on San Clemente Island. These are two San Clemente Island foxes, and in the middle here is a feral cat. He did his part in trying to eradicate exotic animals and species from the Channel Islands because he saw what they were doing to the islands, and he was particularly vocal about what was going on Santa Barbara and Anacapa Island, which are the seabird nesting areas, and he saw how rats and cats and rabbits were destroying the habitat and eating the birds and really causing problems. So he wrote letters to the organization that would become the National Park Service urging eradication of these animals, which has now happened and is the reason that seabirds are doing so well on the islands today. This is Art Woodward. He was the director of anthropology and history. He also studied at Berkeley, but he was very different from Meadows and von Blocher. Art Woodward was a rabble-rouser. He liked what he liked, let you know what he didn't. He had no, he didn't care about the ivory tower. In fact, he left Berkeley 2 years after starting and never went back to college. Yet his work on the Channel Islands earned him the reputation of bringing a new scientific rigor to archaeological investigation on these islands. So moving away from the old Victorian curio and grave robber style of archaeology into, grids and note-taking and so forth. Unfortunately, he did not write anything scientifically up about the Channel Islands, his work there, but he left an amazing field notes that I used throughout my writing, because he left very, intimate details about what they were having for dinner, what they were singing, what they found, what the weather was like. So he really helped me out a lot. The first thing they found when they went to San Clemente Island, which is where the Navy was, and they were very concerned about the effects of the Navy on the island, was this cave. And they found it because Jack von Blocher wanted to find bats, and he asked the Marines where a bat cave was, and they pointed him to this cave. It looks like a bat cave, but instead of finding, a cave filled with warm-winged creatures hanging from their toes and soft guano on the ground, their boots dug into dry sand, and they were able to find pieces of bone, wood, shell, etc. So it was the detritus of a Native American site. The first big thing they found was a ceremonially buried dog. So they named the cave Big Dog Cave, and they continued excavating over time, and they found things like preserved woven mission cloth, 2 pieces of brown and blue and a yellow and brown cloth. They found pieces of otter fur, ceremonially buried chickens. They found a boat prow that still had the rope in the front of it, the hole where the rope was. All of these things were remarkably preserved, which would not have happened on the mainland. And the reason they were preserved is here. They were right above the ocean. So the salt spray was coming into this cave, impregnating and pickling these items and preserving them. Now, Woodward, as I said, did not publish about his finds, but he did keep good notes, and he made these collections and brought them back to the museum, which is a good thing, because today this cave is completely off limits to civilian and military personnel alike, because of the unexploded ordnances that line all of the cave's possible entrances. It is just too dangerous to go into the cave today. Another one of Woodward's really big desires was he was fascinated by the story of the lone woman of San Nicolas Island. And this woman's story was made famous in the 1960s by Scott Odell's book entitled Island of the Blue Dolphins. And she was a real woman, but his story is fictionalized. But what Woodward did is he took the sea captain's memoir, who rescued her, if you will, after she'd been left alone there on those islands for 18 years, and he followed his footsteps around the island until he thought he located her whalebone hut. These 19 bones, Woodward was hoping was her whalebone hut and thought it was, but today scholars have discredited that. And there's a lot about this story in my book, and it's really fascinating, her story, her real story, which more and more is coming to fore. Okay, we're almost done, I promise, but I love this picture, and I just have a few more things to say, but this photograph, I want to point out how far in advance I think the Channel Islands Biological Survey was. Not only were there citizen scientists like Don Meadows who participated, but we have an immigrant. This fellow here is George Kanikoff. He was the museum's invertebrate zoologist and came to the US from Russia at the age of 26. We had teenagers like Jack Kofer, I mentioned, and this fellow, John Schrader. We had women. This is Ona van Blocher. She is Jack's she's Jack's wife, and served as his field assistant and the camp cook, unpaid, of course. She logged the 3rd most time of any participants on the survey, which I give her a lot of credit for doing. We also have this woman, Marion Hollenbach, and one other lady who I do not have a picture of. Her name is Barbara Loomis, and they were the first two female trained archaeologists to ever work on the Channel Islands, and they participated in this survey. So that brings us to Santa Rosa Island, expedition number 13. There was two different camps. One was at the Vale and Vickers Ranch site over here, and the other was at Tecolote Canyon. I mentioned that's where Jack Cofer and Harry Fletcher, the young men, were looking for elephant bones, and where Jack took this picture of Arlington Canyon. Well, Jack was 16 when he arrived on this island, but his birthday was December 7th, 1941, when he turned 17. And he and Fletcher, which is this picture, this is from Jack Cofer, were unearthing these beautiful jawbones, mammoth jawbones, from this extraordinarily steep mountainside. When the vaqueros rode up, it was a cattle ranch. Santa Rosa was a cattle ranch at the time. And they said, you guys, Pearl Harbor's been bombed. The West Coast has been blacked out. No ship traffic is allowed to go in the ocean right now. We can't use our phones, radio phones. We don't know when or how you're going to get off the island, but you got to get back to the main camp. So the boys had this beautiful specimen that they wanted to bring back to the museum, but they didn't have time to get it out of the earth. Now today, paleontologists take huge chunks of earth and bring them back to the museum, and that's when they dig through them. But at this time, they actually excavated on site. So they, not knowing what else to do, put a plaster cast on it and left it there, hoping that they or someone else would one day go back and find these bones and bring them back to the museum. I did some sleuthing. I checked with the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, the LA County Museum, the Park Service, and no bones and plaster casts have ever been found. So they likely fell out of this cliffside and were decimated in the ocean. But the boys did make it back to the camp, and leave it to John Adams Comstock to once again come through for the surveys, the staff. He somehow commandeered this vessel. This is the schooner Santa Cruz. It's a cattle boat, and this is how the ranchers got the cows on and off the island and to the mainland for market. And this boat came to pick up the staff one day later than originally planned. That channel crossing back to the mainland marked the end of the Channel Islands Biological Survey, cut short by war. It only lasted about 2 3/4 years, but much was accomplished. They did go to every island at least once with a full contingent of scientists from all these different disciplines. At least 49 scholarly articles were published. The first women to work in archaeology also participated. So it was really a very successful survey. So just in closing, I want to read you a quote from a letter that this is John Adams Comstock wrote to Jack von Blocher. Jack von Blocher at the time was stationed at Lowry Airfield. This was 9 weeks after World War II ended, and Comstock wrote, "Personally, I wish we had all the old gang back on the job and could take up the Channel Islands survey where we left off. There is still much to do." Today, I'm sure that the survey participants would be thrilled with the work that has been going on in the Channel Islands and the discoveries that have been made and the things that they started and are now being carried forth to fruition. So that's it. Thank you.
That was really great, Corinne. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I don't know if anybody had any questions. I don't see any in the chat, but feel free to jump on in and unmute yourself and ask a question if you have anything.
Oh, hi, Rocky.
Can you show the cover of the book again, once again, please?
Yeah, let me share my screen. You can get it, let's see, I'll go here, I think. Sure. You can get it from any book purveyor. Let's see, how am I gonna do this? Oh, there, wait, go back one, I think. Okay. I need to go to a different. Okay, wait a minute. Oh, here we go. I know. Let's see, slideshow, play from current slide. So there's the book cover. This is actually was fun. It was a really fun collaboration because I had to commission our map makers to make all the map drawings in my book. And then I also commissioned my own artists, and I got to work with this wonderful woman who was just out of college. She actually went to college with my daughter, and my daughter said, "Oh, you got to use her for she's a great artist." And I thought, oh yeah, all college kids think they're great artists, but she really is. And when I got to talk to her, and she said, "I'm either going to get my my master's in technical scientific illustration," because she was an undergraduate biology student, "or I'm going to get a PhD in marine biology." I knew I'd found the right person, because she would understand that things had to be exactly right. And so her drawings, which are in the book on the maps, and she did this cover as well, I always submitted to scientists who then looked at them and said, yes, this is right and this is not right. And my favorite one was a little mouse on Anacapa. The tail was stretched out and it's sort of standing on its hind legs, and the top of the tail is black and the bottom is white. And the scientist said, it's perfect, except the tail colors need to be flipped. And she just fixed it. And this picture here on the cover is a San Miguel Island fox, and all the island foxes, remember, are a little bit different. And the coastline isn't just a pretend coastline, it's actually the coastline of San Miguel that she put in there. And then she said, what should the fox be looking at? And so I said, well, how about a painted lady butterfly, because they're in the book, and I know that they studied them. So it was really fun to do that.
Do we have any other questions? Got a quiet group tonight.
This is Emmy. I'd like to know what got you interested in doing this project. It was so interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, home. I have my goal, my dream as a child was to write a book, and I became a banker and I have an MBA, and but I really like the environmental aspect of the world, and I've been involved in various environmental organizations. And I came up with this idea that I presented to the Natural History Museum of LA County to do something different. And I talked to a couple people there, and this one woman, the archivist, said, if you're going to do all that work, you should write this story because it's never been told and it's really important. And she pushed some boxes of, primary materials, mimeographed, food lists, letters, handwritten letters, newspaper articles about all these people that were on the islands and the scientists going out to them. And I just thought, well, I should read it. I thought the Channel Islands Biological Survey sounded really boring. But when I got into those boxes and I saw there was children living on those islands, and they were filled with ranchers and all these really unique stories and all these great animals and these conservation things, I just dug in, and it was really fun. And I sort of had to teach myself how to do primary research, because I went to UC Irvine, where one scientist left his materials, and the Arizona Historical Society had Art Woodward's documents and his field notes. So I had to go there, and I, just went all over. I even went to the Smithsonian art department, art archives, because the director of the Natural History Museum at the time was an art director more. So, and he was sort of trying to dismantle this survey. So I went there to find out if I could find anything about that in there. So that's what happened. It really was fun.
Thank you.
Vivian?
Hi, thanks so much, Corinne. That was fascinating. Sorry for that. Two questions. One, what do you think is the most invasive plant or animal species on those islands? And the other question I've already forgotten. But it had to do with, are those islands going to disappear? Is that the intent? I mean, if they're dropping that quickly, or the ocean is rising that quickly, what do we expect from that?
Well, sea level rise is occurring, right? I don't think the islands are pretty big. Like Santa Cruz Island was once the largest privately owned island in the United States. It's pretty big. And they're pretty tall. Anacapa is these sheer cliffs that just come out of the water. But probably some of the lowlands, just like two harbors in Catalina. You know, I think that half-mile spit is not long for the world. At some point, it might go away. You know, I mean, that's just the reality of it. But I don't think, unless it's catastrophic, we're going to see them all go away completely. But that's my opinion. That's not an informed opinion. That's just what I think. And you know, even Anacapa, which is actually now 3 islets because of sea level rise. You know, it was once part of Santa Rosa, but now it's 3 islets. But even Anacapa, during the lowest tides, there's sort of these ephemeral sand bridges that connect the islands again. So they are connected at some points in time. And your first question, the most invasive species, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question. I'm not a scientist, but certainly, you know, the eucalyptus on Santa Cruz that were brought over, but now they've been there for 200 years. So it's sort of like, well, when does something become invasive versus like the foxes? You know, you could say, well, Native Americans brought the foxes over probably about 6,000 years ago. So those were exotics, but we don't think of them that way. So, you know, certainly getting rid of the predator or the exotic animals on Santa Barbara Island and Anacapa was key. The rats and the rabbits, and you know, getting rid of all the cats, because that's really been important. So I think let's focus on those good things, maybe. Anybody else?
I have a question. Yeah, did you in your research come up with anything about the Laws ducks, the flightless goose or ducks that were
Yes.
Pleistocene, or
Yes.
wondering if you had any stories about that?
Well, there was a giant mouse that von Blocher found, and when we say giant, I don't think it was like, you know, huge, but I'm thinking it was probably, you know, something like, I don't know exactly, but I touch on it a little bit because they're very interesting stories, but I don't have a lot to add. But also my book, if you were to buy it, it's indexed in the back, so you can look up things like that. And then I have all my sources. It's highly footnoted, so if you find a source, you can go, you know, if you go to Google Scholar and just Google it, you'll find work. And there's some good articles. I know I have them on my electronic file about the flightless goose and the giant mouse. I think I saw, oh, I see Kate, but okay. Sorry, I don't know. I'm sorry if I didn't answer more than you wanted.
I have a
Anybody else?
question if that one's finished, is that?
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Yes, I'm wondering in your book, do you have a reference for the part of the geology you spoke of where you said that the islands had never been part of the, well, you didn't say they hadn't been part of the mainland, but you said that they were submerged. And the reason I'm asking this is because I was under the impression that there was some theory that potentially the Torrey Pines were once connected. You know, Santa Rosa Island was once part of the same land that La Jolla Del Mar is on, and that is one of the reasons there's Torrey Pines there.
Okay. Okay. I am not a geologist, but I did research this very carefully, and I did fact check with other geologists. And yes, I mean, the islands were submerged near San Diego. And
Yeah.
I don't know when the San Diego Torrey Pine evolved, but they were submerged and then they were dragged northward and rotated clockwise. So that's, I think, how they know they were, and I'm really venturing beyond my knowledge base, but I think the reason they know that happened was there, I think, are magnetic fields and sort of
Yeah. There's rocks that it's all part of a delta that actually was not where San Diego is. It was much further south. It was there's a volcano in Sonora that you know spewed out lots of rhyolites. I think it's rhyolite stuff that is found in this along our coast in San Diego and also on the Channel Islands, and so that's why they know that. but there have been, you know, some theories that the trees, you know, belong to a contiguous piece of land. And they certainly, that this all happened in the Miocene, and that you know, the pine trees have been around since the Oligocene or something like that. So it's all possible, but not if they're submerged. I had never heard that one before. So is there a reference to the stuff in your book?
I heard of running back and forth to the pharmacy for pet prescriptions with chewy farm.
Yes, there is. There are
Okay.
details about that. And there's a woman, and I wish I could think of her name right now, but I think in the 60s, she lives here in Santa Barbara. She was the one who figured it out and proved how it all happened. And there's
Yeah.
some videos about it that she's created. And I've watched them so many times, and
Yeah.
they're way over my, it sounds like you're a geologist, but it is footnoted in my book.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh, there's one right here.
Ellie?
Ellie? Yeah.
Yes, I noticed in one of the photos where the ships or the boats were coming in and delivering, there was a photo of a boat, and on the side of the hull it said Catalina.
That was
Was
the
that-
Great White Stream. That was the Great White Steamer, and one expedition, a couple, the Willets, they were birders actually. They went to Catalina and they did take the Great White Steamer over. So I thought that was sort of fun just to include. But you know, I couldn't. I talked so long. I didn't want to bore you guys with every little.
Is that the same Catalina boat that would take the tourists from the mainland over to Catalina Island then? Oh, interesting. Okay. I've been to Catalina via boat, but not that particular one.
I actually have a question for all of you. I don't know if you could, how we can do this, if you do the chat or something, but I'm wondering how many of you all have been to the islands, the Channel Islands. So lots of you guessing. And how many of you have seen the J? Have you put that one on your life list? Ah, genius. That's exciting. They were fun to see, right? Yeah.
Beautiful birds. Yeah.
Mhm. The islands are really beautiful, and the concessionaire is Island Packers, and they leave out of Ventura or Oxnard, Ventura, I guess Ventura Harbor, and that's where Channel Islands, also the National Park Service has a facility there. But the trip to Anacapa is very short. You know, they usually stretch it out to be about 45 minutes or an hour, because if you see a whale or some great birds, you follow those around. And but then the hardest part of getting to Anacapa is it's only 1 square mile up top, but there's the lighthouse. It's just gorgeous. But once you dock, you have to sort of jump up on the pier because you can't tie in. It's in a little cove. And then there's 157 steps that go up to the top of the island that you have to walk up. So you have to be somewhat able-bodied to get there. But once you're there, you know, you can walk that island. It's totally flat. And like I said, I know it's crazy to think that Western gulls are beautiful, but they are really beautiful when you see them nesting on the ground like that. So thank
So
you.
Corinne, you mentioned you're in the all 8 club, which means you've seen, it means you set foot on all 8 islands. Is that right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
I see
pardon me?
It looks like Patty is probably the second one in line there with 3 islands.
Oh, okay, that's great. I mean, the 4 northern islands and Santa Barbara are part of Channel Islands National Park. So in general, they're pretty easy to get to, but the pier washed out of Santa Barbara Island a number of years ago, and the Park Service hasn't been able to pay for getting another pier there. So I was able to go there. I went on a dive boat that did trips out to Santa Barbara Island out of San Pedro. And then we took a Zodiac, and you kind of jump onto shore, and it's, you know, it's too dangerous for just the Park Service to let the public go, I guess, so you have to do it that way. But the funny thing there was that there's stairs that go up to the top of Santa Barbara Island. It's only 1 square mile. It's tiny, but there was peregrine falcons and those nestlings and all that kind of stuff were there. But going up the stairs, the park ranger had to shoo away all the sea lions because they're all lying on they're massive. You kind of turn the corner and oh my God, there's a sea lion, you know, it's 800 pounds of blubber. How am I going to get away from this thing? So you have to be a little bit adventurous to go out there. But otherwise, the 4 islands are easy. And then Catalina, of course, is easy. So that would be 5, 6, 7, and 8 are the hard ones. That's San Nick, which is the furthest out to sea, at 64 miles. And it is a missile launching site and very secretive base. I was able to go out as a contractor, doing some restoration work for an organization called Channel Islands Restoration, and they do plant rehabilitation, and it was backbreaking work. We put in drip lines and plants, and you know, we're putting whole hillsides of these native plants in place. And then San Clemente is probably the most secretive island, and it's been owned by the Navy since 1934. It's the U.S. SEALs training base. They have a black landing airstrip, which, you know, it's completely dark at night. They can do simulated carrier takeoffs and landings there. They do have submarine trenches. And they also built a replica of Osama bin Laden's encampment, which is still standing, but that's how they trained for that mission. And I was lucky enough to go there because I had a book publisher, a contract with, my book is peer reviewed. But because I had a contract, I was able to present, they had an author program, and they flew me out there on a, well, it's just a RJ, but it's piloted by military pilots. And then I had somebody assigned to me to take me around and show me everything. So I got to see the loggerhead shrike captive breeding program. And so I got to walk through that encampment of Osama bin Laden's, and it was pretty amazing.
Wow. So how many people are in that group, the All 8 Club?
I haven't looked lately, but it's managed by the Santa Cruz Island Foundation, which was Carrie Stanton used to own that island, and his former archaeological aide, and I don't know, she did all sorts of things. She started this organization, or they started Santa Cruz Island Foundation, and she keeps the record and has gone back in history to look. Like some of my scientists, I call them my scientists, my guys, are all eighters. I'm number 223.
Wow.
And so now I think it's up to 250. It's kind of gotten cool to say you've done that, you know, so people, they try to, like, they'll swim on to San Clemente Island, take a picture, and then swim back to their boat or something. But I actually was diving there. Now, this was years ago, and San Clemente is beautiful diving. But in the middle of the night, we were anchored, and we had a little 6-pack boat. And I don't know, I guess our captain didn't read the rules very well, because the military came out with blasters and big lights and said, "Move your boat, we're going to start bombing." It's like that anchor went up pretty fast, and we hightailed it out of there.
I see Kathy H has been to 5 of the islands: Santa Cruz, San Miguel, Anacapa, Santa Rosa, and Catalina. Wow.
Yeah, you've just got you got to get to Santa Barbara. That's the Magician. That's who I went out on with out of San Pedro. If you want to go to Santa Barbara, go there in the spring so you can see the murrelets and the birds that are nesting on that island, because you get some birders.
Cool. Anybody else? Okay, great. Well, thank you for coming tonight. And thank you, Corinne. We really appreciate all the interesting talk you had. And I'm sure many of us are looking forward to reading the book too.
Thank you. I love being here with you. You asked great questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Everyone. Bye-bye.